Maria Santos wiped her hands on her apron as she surveyed the massive kitchen that would be her domain for the next 6 months. The military base in Afghanistan was nothing like the restaurants back in Texas, where she had spent the last 15 years perfecting her craft. Here, everything was beige and functional, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. She had taken the job as head cook for the forward operating base partly for the money, but mostly to escape the painful memories that seemed to lurk around every corner back home. After her husband died in a car accident, cooking had lost its joy. The familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring sauces only reminded her of the meals they would never share again. The other civilian contractors had warned her about the strict hierarchy on the base. Military personnel expected immediate compliance from support staff. "Yes, sir," and "No, sir," were the only acceptable responses to any request from an officer. Maria listened politely but kept her thoughts to herself. She had been running kitchens long before these young soldiers were born, and she knew how to handle difficult personalities. Her first week passed quietly. She arrived before dawn to prepare breakfast for 800 soldiers, worked through the blazing heat of midday preparing lunch, and stayed late into the evening ensuring dinner met the nutritional requirements mandated by military regulations. The soldiers appreciated her efforts. Unlike the previous cook who had relied heavily on prepackaged meals, Maria made everything from scratch when supplies allowed. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in her second week. General Harrison arrived at the base for what was supposed to be a routine inspection. Had earned his 4th star through a combination of strategic brilliance and absolute intolerance for anything he perceived as insubordination. At 55, he was being considered for promotion to chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the highest military position in the country. Maria was in the middle of preparing lunch when Sergeant Collins burst through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with panic. "Ma'am, the general wants to see you immediately," he said, struggling to catch his breath. Maria looked up from the industrial-sized pot of chili she was stirring. "What about?" "I don't know, ma'am. He just said to bring the cook to his temporary office right away." She wiped her hands clean and followed the sergeant across the compound. The temporary office was actually a converted shipping container with air conditioning units humming loudly on both sides. Inside, General sat behind a folding table that served as his desk, reviewing documents with the focused intensity that had made him legendary in military circles. He was exactly what Maria expected from the stories she had heard. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of ramrod posture that suggested he had never slouched in his entire life. His uniform was immaculate despite the dust and heat outside. When he looked up at her, his pale blue eyes seemed to every detail of her appearance in seconds. "You're the cook," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, Maria Santos. I've been reviewing the food service reports from this base. Your predecessor was running a very different operation." Maria waited for him to continue, unsure whether this was a compliment or criticism. "Tomorrow morning, I'm hosting a breakfast meeting with 3 visiting congressional representatives. These are important people who control military funding. I need you to prepare something special, something that will impress them." "Of course, sir. I can prepare a traditional American breakfast with fresh ingredients: eggs, bacon, hash browns, fresh fruit, and homemade biscuits." General shook his head impatiently. "No, I want you to prepare authentic Mexican food. Breakfast burritos, rancheros, that sort of thing. Show them some of that ethnic cooking you people are known for." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. In that moment, she saw herself as the general clearly did, not as a professional chef with years of experience, not as a woman who had built a successful catering business from nothing, but simply as a stereotype. A Mexican woman who must naturally excel at making tacos and enchiladas because that's what her people did. She had faced this assumption countless times throughout her career. Restaurant owners who hired her specifically to add authenticity to their Mexican night specials. Customers who complimented her on dishes she didn't create while ignoring her innovative fusion cuisine. Food critics who praised her natural instincts for spice rather than acknowledging the years she had spent studying under classically trained chefs. The silence in the shipping container stretched uncomfortably long. General was clearly waiting for her enthusiastic agreement. Behind him, she could see Sergeant Collins shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Sir," she said finally, "I'd prefer to prepare the American breakfast I mentioned. I think it would be more appropriate for the occasion." General's eyebrows rose slightly. In his 37-year military career, very few people had ever responded to his requests with anything other than immediate compliance. "I wasn't making a request, Ms. Santos. I was giving you an instruction." "I understand that, sir. But I respectfully decline to prepare Mexican food simply because you assume that's what I should cook based on my ethnicity." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Sergeant Collins looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. General slowly set down the document he had been holding and gave Maria his complete attention. "Excuse me. I'm a professional chef, sir. I've been cooking for 20 years. I can prepare cuisine from many different cultures, but I won't be reduced to a stereotype. I'll make you the best American breakfast those congressmen have ever tasted, but I won't play the role of the authentic Mexican cook just because it fits your expectations." For perhaps the first time in his adult life, General Harrison found himself completely speechless. He stared at this middle-aged woman in a stained apron who had just done something no colonel, no fellow general, no Secretary of Defense had ever dared to do. She had told him no. Not just no, but a no that exposed his own prejudices in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. He realized that she was absolutely right. He had looked at her name and appearance and immediately assumed she would naturally excel at Mexican cuisine. It hadn't occurred to him to ask about her actual background or expertise. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Maria stood her ground, meeting his gaze steadily. She knew this moment would define not just her remaining time on the base, but quite possibly her entire future. Word traveled fast in military circles. If she was labeled as insubordinate, she would never work another contract. But she also knew that some lines could not be uncrossed. If she backed down now, she would spend the rest of her career being defined by other people's assumptions about who she was supposed to be. General finally spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "Ms. Santos, I think there has been a misunderstanding." "I don't think there has been, sir." Another long pause. Behind the general, Sergeant Collins looked like he was considering whether it would be possible to spontaneously combust through sheer force of will. "Report to the kitchen," General said finally. "Prepare whatever breakfast you think is most appropriate." Maria nodded. "Thank you, sir." She turned and walked toward the door, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the container could hear it. As she reached for the handle, General spoke again. "Ms. Santos." She turned back to face him. "That breakfast better be exceptional." "It will be, sir." As she walked back across the compound, Maria realized that her hands were shaking. She had just stood up to one of the most powerful military officers in the world, and somehow she was still employed. But she also knew that this was far from over. General was not a man who forgot confrontations, especially ones that challenged his authority in front of subordinates. Tomorrow's breakfast would be more than just a meal. It would be a test, a demonstration of whether her principles were backed up by skill. That evening, as she planned the menu and checked her supplies, Maria found herself thinking about her late husband, Carlos. He had always encouraged her to stand up for herself, even when it was difficult. "You are not just a cook," he used to say. "You are an artist. Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are." She had made her choice. Now she had to prove that she was right to make it. Maria arrived in the kitchen at 3:30 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual. She had barely slept, her mind racing through every detail of the breakfast she was about to prepare. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was about dignity, respect, and proving that she was exactly as professional as she claimed to be. She started with the biscuits, mixing the dough by hand and folding it with the precise technique she had learned from her grandmother, who had worked as a cook for wealthy families in San during the 1950s. Her grandmother had taught her that cooking was both art and communication, a way to show care and respect that transcended language barriers. As the biscuits baked, filling the kitchen with their buttery aroma, Maria prepared fresh fruit salad with local pomegranates and imported berries that had arrived on the supply flight the day before. She hand-cut hash browns from real potatoes, seasoning them with herbs she had been growing in small pots near the kitchen window. The bacon came from a premium supplier she had specifically requested when she took the job. She cooked it in small batches, ensuring each piece was perfectly crispy without being burned. For the eggs, she planned to prepare them to order, demonstrating the kind of attention to detail that separated professional cooking from mere food preparation. As dawn approached and other kitchen staff began arriving for their shifts, word spread quickly through the base about the confrontation between Maria and General. Military bases were small communities where news traveled fast, and everyone knew that something significant had happened. Corporal Jennifer Martinez, who helped with food service, approached Maria carefully. "Ma'am, is it true that you told the general no?" Maria continued whisking eggs for scrambling, not looking up. "I told him I would prepare an appropriate breakfast for his guests. But people are saying you refused a direct order." "I declined to be stereotyped, Corporal. There's a difference." Other staff members gathered around, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. In their world, defying a four-star general was like defying gravity, theoretically possible but practically unthinkable. "What do you think will happen?" asked Private Johnson, who worked in food storage. "I think," Maria said, finally looking up from her preparation, "that we're going to serve the best breakfast these congressmen have ever eaten, and then we'll see what happens after that." At 7:15, she began the final preparations. The dining area had been specially prepared for the occasion, with a proper tablecloth covering the usual folding table and actual cloth napkins instead of paper ones. The base's best china, normally reserved for visiting dignitaries, had been carefully washed and arranged. General arrived with his 3 congressional guests at exactly 8 o'clock. Maria watched from the kitchen door as he made introductions. Congressman from Ohio, Congresswoman Diana from California, and Congressman Robert Hayes from Texas. These were the people who would ultimately decide funding for military operations around the world. She took a deep breath and began plating the first course. Fresh fruit salad in chilled bowls, presented with small mint garnishes she had cultivated specifically for occasions like this. The presentation was restaurant quality, a reminder that she brought the same standards to this military kitchen that she would to any fine dining establishment. As she carried the fruit to the table, she could feel General watching her intently. His expression was neutral, but she sensed the challenge in his gaze. He was waiting to see whether her defiance would be backed up by exceptional skill. "This looks wonderful," Congresswoman said as Maria set down her bowl. "Did you prepare this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything this morning is made fresh." "It's beautiful," Congressman added. "I haven't seen presentation like this since my last meal in Washington." Maria returned to the kitchen feeling cautiously optimistic. The first course had been well received, but the real test would come with the main breakfast. She began preparing eggs to order, scrambling some with cream and chives, preparing others over easy with perfectly runny yolks. The hash browns came out of the oven golden and crispy. The biscuits were warm, fluffy, and accompanied by both butter and honey that she had sourced from a local supplier. The bacon was arranged precisely on warming plates, each piece uniform in color and texture. When she brought out the main course, the reaction was immediate and unmistakable. All 3 stopped their conversation to focus on the food in front of them. "This is incredible," Congressman Hayes said after his first bite. "General, you didn't tell us you had a professional chef on the base." "Ms. Santos has been with us for 2 weeks," General replied carefully. "Well, she's certainly an asset," Congresswoman added. "This rivals anything I've had in the finest restaurants back home." Maria felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with relief. But as she returned to the kitchen, she noticed that General had barely touched his food. He was listening politely to his guests' conversation, but his attention kept drifting back to her. After the finished eating and began discussing military appropriations, Maria started cleaning the kitchen. She was washing the last of the serving dishes when Sergeant Collins appeared at her elbow. "Ma'am, the General wants to see you again." Her stomach dropped. She had hoped that the success of the breakfast might end the confrontation, but apparently General wasn't finished with her yet. This time, he was waiting for her outside the dining area, away from his guests who were still discussing funding levels for overseas operations. "Ms. Santos." "Yes, sir." "That was an exceptional breakfast." "Thank you, sir." He studied her face for a long moment. "My guests were very impressed. Congressman Hayes specifically asked me to thank the chef personally." Maria waited for the other shoe to drop. In her experience, compliments from difficult people usually came with conditions attached. "I owe you an apology," General said quietly. The words were so unexpected that Maria wasn't sure she had heard correctly. Sir, yesterday I made assumptions about you based on your ethnicity. That was inappropriate and unprofessional. You were right to call me out on it. She studied his face, looking for any sign that this was some kind of test or trap, but his expression seemed genuinely remorseful. Thank you for saying that, sir. I've been thinking about our conversation all night, he continued. In 37 years of military service, very few people have had the courage to tell me when I was wrong. Most of them were fellow officers who felt safe challenging me because of their rank. You had no such protection. Maria remained silent, unsure how to respond. What you did yesterday took real courage, General said, but it also put me in a very difficult position. Word has already spread through the base about our confrontation. Some of my officers are questioning whether I've lost control of civilian personnel. I'm sorry if I caused problems for you, sir. Don't apologize. You did nothing wrong, but we need to address this situation before it gets out of hand. Maria felt her anxiety returning. What do you mean, sir? I mean that I need to make it clear to everyone on this base that what happened yesterday was not insubordination. It was a professional disagreement that was resolved appropriately. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I'm going to recommend you for a commendation. Outstanding performance in support of congressional relations. It will go in your permanent file and ensure that your contract is renewed when it expires. Maria was speechless. She had expected consequences, possibly severe ones. Instead, she was being rewarded. But I want you to understand something, General continued. What you did yesterday worked because you were absolutely right, and because you backed up your position with exceptional skill. If you had been wrong, or if that breakfast had been mediocre, this conversation would be very different. I understand, sir. Do you? Because I'm not sure you realize how much courage you showed, or how unusual it is for someone in your position to stand up to someone in mine. Maria thought about her response carefully. My husband used to say that integrity isn't something you can turn on and off depending on who you're talking to. If you compromise it once, it becomes easier to compromise it again. General nodded slowly. Your husband sounds like a wise man. He was, sir. I lost him 2 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Finally, General spoke again. Ms. Santos, I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer. Of course, sir. Do you think I'm a prejudiced man? The question caught her completely off guard. She looked at this powerful military leader who seemed genuinely concerned about her opinion of his character. I think you're a man who made an assumption based on limited information, she said finally. I don't think that makes you prejudiced. I think it makes you human. But you still called me out on it. Because assumptions can be dangerous, sir. They can make people smaller than they really are. General was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. You know, I've been recommended for promotion to chairman of the Joint Chiefs. If I get that position, I'll be responsible for military personnel from every background imaginable. People like you will be counting on me to see them clearly. Yes, sir. Thank you for the reminder of how important that is. As Maria walked back to the kitchen, she realized that something fundamental had shifted. The confrontation that had begun with stereotyping and defiance had somehow evolved into mutual respect. But she also sensed that General was still processing what had happened, and she wasn't sure how it would ultimately affect her time on the base. 3 weeks passed after the breakfast incident, and life on the base settled into a new rhythm. Maria noticed subtle changes in how she was treated by military personnel. Officers who had previously barely acknowledged her existence now stopped to chat about the meals. Some even asked for her input on menu planning for special events. But the most significant change was in General himself. Instead of leaving the base immediately after his inspection as originally planned, he extended his stay to conduct what he called a comprehensive review of base operations. Maria suspected this was at least partially related to their confrontation, though she couldn't be sure exactly why. He began showing up in the dining hall during meals, something that made everyone nervous initially. But instead of conducting formal inspections, he would sit with different groups of soldiers and ask about their experiences. Maria often noticed him watching her work through the service window, though he never approached her directly. The real test came when Colonel Stevens arrived for a 2-day leadership conference that General was hosting. Stevens had a reputation throughout the military for being brilliant, demanding, and completely intolerant of incompetence. She was also one of only a handful of female officers being considered for promotion to general, making her visit particularly significant. Maria was informed that she would be responsible for all meals during the conference, including a formal dinner for 20 senior officers. This was far beyond her usual responsibilities, but General had specifically requested that she handle the entire event. She spent 3 days planning the menu, consulting with suppliers about specialty ingredients, and coordinating with base personnel for service support. The formal dinner would feature herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables with her signature seasoning blend, and a dessert course that would showcase skills she rarely had opportunity to use in military food service. The night before the dinner, Maria stayed late in the kitchen, preparing components that could be made in advance. She was focused on preparing a complex reduction sauce when she heard footsteps behind her. "Ms. Santos." She turned to find General standing in the kitchen doorway, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "General, is there something you need for tomorrow's dinner?" "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something else." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've been watching how you work these past few weeks." Maria continued stirring the sauce, unsure where this conversation was heading. "You run this kitchen differently than anyone I've seen," he continued. "Your staff respects you. The soldiers appreciate the care you put into their meals, and after watching you handle that breakfast I realized something." He stepped closer to her workstation, and Maria could see that he was genuinely struggling with whatever he was trying to say. "I've been in command positions for 20 years, he said finally. "I thought I understood leadership, but what you did 3 weeks ago wasn't just about standing up for yourself. It was about maintaining your professional standards even when it would have been easier to go along with what was expected." Maria set down her whisk and gave him her full attention. "I've been thinking about the difference between authority and respect," he continued. "I can order people to do things and they'll do them because they have to, but you get people to excel because they want to meet your standards. I just try to treat everyone with dignity, sir." "That's exactly what I mean. You don't demand respect. You earn it by showing it to others first." General was quiet for a moment, watching her work. "Tomorrow night, Colonel Stevens is going to announce the results of her review. She's been evaluating base operations, but she's also been evaluating me." Maria wasn't sure why he was sharing this information with her. "The promotion to chairman of the Joint Chiefs requires Senate confirmation," he explained. "Any hint of leadership problems or poor judgment can derail the entire process." Suddenly, Maria understood. "You're worried that our confrontation will reflect badly on your leadership abilities." "No," he said, surprising her. "I'm worried that if I get promoted, I'll lose sight of lessons like the one you taught me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an official-looking document. "This is a letter of recommendation. If you ever want to pursue opportunities outside military contract work, this will open doors. I've sent copies to several people I know in the hospitality industry." Maria took the letter with shaking hands. The letterhead alone was impressive enough to change her career prospects permanently. "Why?" she asked. "Because talent deserves recognition, and because you reminded me that leadership isn't about getting people to follow orders. It's about inspiring them to do their best work." The next evening, Maria threw herself into preparation for the formal dinner with an intensity that surprised even her experienced staff. Every detail had to be perfect, from the precise timing of each course to the presentation of individual plates. Colonel Stevens proved to be exactly as formidable as her reputation suggested. She arrived early, toured the kitchen, and asked pointed questions about food safety protocols and budget management. Maria answered each query professionally, demonstrating the depth of knowledge that came from years of running commercial kitchens. "Impressive operation," Stevens told General as they left the kitchen area. "Your contract staff seems exceptionally competent." The dinner itself went flawlessly. Each course was timed perfectly, presented beautifully, and received with genuine appreciation by the attending officers. Maria watched from the kitchen as Colonel Stevens complimented General on the quality of base operations. After the last plate was served and the dining area cleaned, Maria was exhausted but satisfied. She was packing up her equipment when General appeared in the kitchen one final time. "Outstanding work tonight," he said. "Thank you, sir." Colonel Stevens was very impressed. She specifically mentioned the professionalism of your operation. Maria felt a surge of pride. Recognition from someone of Stevens' caliber was rare and valuable. "But there's something else," General continued. "She asked about you specifically, about your background and experience." "Oh." It seems she's been tasked with improving food service standards across all overseas bases. She's looking for someone with the expertise to develop new protocols and training programs. Maria's heart skipped. That sounds like an important position. It would be, based here in the States, working directly with senior leadership to implement changes throughout the military food service system. It would also come with a significant promotion and pay increase. And she's considering me for this position. She's more than considering you. She's prepared to make an offer. The position would start in 6 months, giving you time to finish your current contract here. Maria was speechless. 6 weeks ago, she had been a cook trying to escape painful memories. Now she was being offered a career opportunity that would utilize all of her skills and experience at the highest levels of military administration. "There's just one condition," General added. Maria's excitement dimmed slightly. "What's that, sir?" "She wants you to complete a leadership training program. 3 weeks at the Army Management Staff College. You'd be the first civilian food service professional to attend." Leadership training. Colonel Stevens believes that the changes needed in military food service require someone who understands both culinary excellence and personnel management. She was very impressed by how you handle your staff and maintain standards under pressure. Maria thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The grief that had driven her to accept the overseas contract, the confrontation that had forced her to stand up for her principles, and now an opportunity to influence military food service on a national level. "Will you accept?" General asked. "Yes, sir, absolutely." As they walked out of the kitchen together, General spoke once more. "You know, when I first met you, I thought I was dealing with just another contract employee, someone who would follow orders and not cause problems. And now I realize that the best people are often the ones who refuse to accept limitations others try to place on them. You didn't just tell me no that day. You told me I could do better." 6 months later, Maria stood in the Pentagon briefing room, presenting her comprehensive plan for improving food service standards across all military installations. In the audience sat generals, admirals, and senior civilian officials who would implement her recommendations. General, now confirmed as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, sat in the front row. When she finished her presentation, he was the first to stand and applaud. After the meeting, as Maria gathered her materials, he approached her. "Outstanding presentation," he said. "You've given us a roadmap that will improve quality of life for thousands of service members." "Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "You earned it, but I have to ask you something." "What's that?" "Do you ever regret taking that job in Afghanistan? Everything that happened could have ended very differently." Maria considered the question seriously. The job had indeed changed everything about her life, though not in ways she could have predicted. "No regrets," she said finally. "Sometimes the most important conversations start with someone being willing to say no." General smiled. "I'll remember that. In fact, I've already started encouraging my staff to challenge my assumptions when they think I'm wrong." "And how's that working out?" "Better than I expected. Turns out that being surrounded by people who aren't afraid to disagree with you is actually good for decision-making." As Maria left the Pentagon that day, she thought about her late husband, Carlos. He had always believed that standing up for your principles would ultimately lead to good things, even when the immediate consequences seemed uncertain. She had started as just a cook trying to escape her grief. But by refusing to be diminished by someone else's assumptions, she had discovered that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. Sometimes the most important moments in life came not from saying yes to what was expected, but from having the courage to say no to what was wrong.